The MSNBC studio lights felt hotter than usual. Or maybe that was just the anger radiating off Representative Jasmine Crockett as she sat across from anchor Chris Hayes. It was a Friday afternoon in late September, and Washington buzzed with that kind of chaos people had sadly grown used to. Another government shutdown loomed. Millions of Americans wondered if their paychecks would come. Federal workers were preparing to go without pay. Families who depended on SNAP benefits waited, worried they would not have food on the table next week. But what had Crockett fired up wasn't just the shutdown itself. It was something that felt even more personal, something that insulted the people she represented. Speaker Mike Johnson had just announced, 2 hours earlier, that Congress would recess for 2 full weeks while negotiations remained stalled. In other words, while Americans suffered, Congress would go on vacation. Chris Hayes leaned forward, sensing that his guest was ready to explode. "Congresswoman Crockett," he asked carefully, "Speaker Johnson just announced the House will recess until October 16th, despite no deal on the funding bill. Your reaction?" Crockett's jaw tightened. The tension in her shoulders was visible, but her voice, when it came, was steady and sharp. "Chris," she began, "let me tell you what's happening right now in my district in Dallas. I've got a constituent named Patricia. She's 68 years old. She worked as a nurse for 43 years before retiring. Her SNAP benefits, the ones that help her buy groceries, are about to stop. She called my office this morning crying, asking if she should choose between her blood pressure medication or eating this month. And you're asking how I feel about Mike Johnson taking a vacation?" The studio went silent. Chris's eyebrows lifted. The control room stopped what they were doing. And on social media, where the interview was already streaming live, the clip began spreading like wildfire. Crockett leaned closer to the camera, her voice gaining force. "For weeks now, the speaker has told the American people that we need to make tough choices. He says we can't afford to keep funding certain programs, that we have to be fiscally responsible. But apparently, being responsible doesn't include staying in Washington to do your job. Apparently, tough choices don't apply to congressional vacation schedules." Her words hit like thunder. "We've got federal workers about to miss their rent payments. We've got military families wondering how to feed their kids. Small businesses that depend on federal contracts are about to go under. And Mike Johnson's solution?" She paused for effect. "See you in 2 weeks. Figure it out yourselves. Hope you don't starve while I'm gone." Chris tried to step in, maybe to balance the conversation, but Crockett raised her hand. "No, Chris. Let me finish this, because somebody needs to say it. The speaker keeps talking about dignity of work, about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, about personal responsibility. Well, where's his responsibility? Where's the dignity in walking away from your job when millions of Americans are counting on you to do it?" The 8-minute interview turned into something unforgettable. Crockett didn't shout. She didn't fumble. She just laid out truth after truth with calm fury. By the time it ended, her phone was already lighting up. Her social media mentions were exploding by the thousands. News producers were clipping her words and replaying them on every network. By 5 p.m., journalists had already coined a phrase for what had just happened: Crockett's shutdown call-out. But the real storm was still to come. Within an hour of the interview ending, Speaker Mike Johnson's office released a statement. It sounded polite, composed, and professional, but it said nothing. Speaker Johnson remains committed to reaching a bipartisan funding solution. The brief recess will allow members to return to their districts, hear from constituents, and return ready to negotiate in good faith. It was political spin at its finest. The kind of sentence that pretends to mean something but actually means nothing at all. Johnson's team, however, had made a big mistake. They had underestimated how angry Americans were, and they had underestimated Jasmine Crockett. That same evening, Crockett called an impromptu press conference outside the Capitol. It wasn't planned. No glossy banners, no speechwriters, no script. Just Crockett, a handful of reporters, and a few House Democrats who decided to stand beside her. But make no mistake, this was her stage. She stepped up to the microphone and held up her phone, showing Johnson's statement on the screen. "I just read the speaker's statement," she said, her voice ringing through the cold air. "And I have to say, it's one of the most insulting things I've ever read." The cameras zoomed in. She looked straight into one of them. "The speaker says members need to go home and hear from their constituents. Let me tell you what my constituents are saying, Mr. Speaker. They're saying they can't afford to wait 2 weeks. Their landlords don't care about congressional recesses. Their kids get hungry every day, not just on days when Congress feels like working." Then she did something that had become her signature move. She pulled out a thick folder, a stack of printed letters, emails, and text messages from people in her district. "Let me read you something," she said, flipping the first page. "This is from Marcus, a TSA agent at DFW Airport. He writes, 'Congresswoman, I've worked every government shutdown for the last 15 years. Every time they tell us we'll get back pay eventually. But my electricity company doesn't accept eventually. My daughter needs braces now, not eventually. Please make them understand we're real people, not political pawns.'" Crockett looked up, her voice tight with emotion. "Marcus isn't asking for a handout. He's asking to be paid for work he already did. He's asking Congress to do its job. And Speaker Johnson's answer is, take a vacation." The reporters scribbled fast. The cameras kept rolling. She turned the page. This one's from Sandra, a single mom in Oak Cliff. She writes, "My SNAP benefits are supposed to reload on October 1st. That's the only way I can buy groceries for my kids. I work full-time at Walmart, but it's not enough to cover rent, utilities, and food. If those benefits don't come, I don't know what I'll do. I don't know how to explain to my 6-year-old why there's no food in the house when mommy works every day." Her voice trembled slightly, but she held steady. Sandra doesn't need her congresswoman to go home and listen. She needs her congresswoman to stay here and fix the problem. She needs Speaker Johnson to do his job instead of taking a vacation while she wonders how to feed her children. Cameras flashed. Some of the reporters were visibly moved. This wasn't politics anymore. It was humanity. Then Crockett's tone shifted. The warmth vanished. What came next was sharp, direct, almost surgical. "Let's talk about this so-called good faith," she said. "Good faith is staying at the negotiating table until you reach a deal. Good faith is skipping your vacation when the country is in crisis. Good faith is treating the American people with the same urgency you treat your donors." She pointed behind her to the glowing dome of the Capitol. "Right now, in that building, we have everything we need to solve this. Rooms, staff, authority. The only thing missing is the political will." A reporter called out, "Congresswoman, isn't this just how the process works? Don't negotiations sometimes require breaks?" Crockett turned to him, not angry, just unflinchingly firm. "Does your landlord give you a break when rent is due? Does your grocery store let you take a negotiation break when you can't pay? No? Then Congress doesn't get to either." Another voice shouted, "What do you want Speaker Johnson to do specifically?" Crockett didn't hesitate. "I want him to cancel the recess. I want him to keep the House in session. I want him to bring a clean continuing resolution to the floor tonight. And if he won't, I want him to look every federal worker and every American family in the eye and explain why his vacation is more important than their survival." Every sentence landed like a hammer. The press conference went on for 20 minutes, but the most powerful moments came in the first 10. Cameras caught the passion, the frustration, the righteous fire of a congresswoman who simply refused to stay quiet. By the time she walked off the steps, the clips were already flooding every social platform. "Crockett slams Johnson" trended across Twitter. Cable news anchors replayed the moment again and again. And in living rooms across America, people who usually tuned out politics suddenly sat up and listened. Jasmine Crockett had done something rare. She'd made Washington's dysfunction feel personal, real, immediate. And what happened next would take even Washington by surprise. Because while Speaker Johnson thought this was just another round, Of political sparring, he had no idea that Jasmine Crockett had only just begun, and the real storm was about to hit. Within an hour of that fiery interview, the Speaker's office moved fast. They sent out an official statement filled with the usual polished words. It sounded calm, even polite, but it said nothing that people wanted to hear. It read, "Speaker. Johnson remains committed to reaching a bipartisan solution. The brief recess will allow members to return home, hear from constituents, and come back ready to negotiate." The words looked neat on paper. But to the millions of Americans watching their savings shrink and their bills pile up, it felt like salt on an open wound. People were tired of hearing promises that meant nothing. They needed results, not phrases. And Jasmine Crockett knew that better than anyone. That same evening, the Capitol steps became the stage for something Washington rarely sees: raw honesty. The air was thick with humidity. Cameras pointed toward the small group forming at the bottom of the marble stairs. Crockett walked up slowly, holding a folder under her arm. A few other Democrats joined her, but even they stood a step behind. This was her moment. She faced the microphones and lifted her phone. "I just read the Speaker's statement," she said, her voice carrying easily through the night air. "And I have to say, it's one of the most insulting things I've ever read." The reporters leaned closer. You could hear the clicking of cameras. "The Speaker says members need to go home and hear from their constituents," she went on. "Well, let me tell you what mine are saying. They're saying they can't afford to wait 2 weeks. Their landlords don't take vacations. Their kids get hungry every day, not just on congressional workdays." She opened her folder. Inside were letters, printed emails, and text screenshots. She began to read them one by one, each one another slice of real life. A veteran waiting on his VA benefits. A nurse whose hospital overtime wouldn't cover groceries if SNAP stopped. A small business owner with federal invoices frozen. Each line she read made the crowd quieter. "This one," she said, holding up a letter, "is from Marcus, a TSA agent. He says, 'My electricity company doesn't accept eventually. My daughter needs braces now, not eventually.' That's what the Speaker doesn't get. These are not numbers. They are people." Her tone hardened. "And Sandra," she continued, "a mother of 3 in Oak Cliff, she writes, 'If those benefits don't come, I don't know what I'll do.' That's the voice of America, Mr. Speaker, not your donors, not the lobbyists. These are the people who put us here." It wasn't anger that carried her words now. It was conviction. "You talk about good faith?" she said, raising her hand slightly. "Good faith is staying in this city until you finish the job. Good faith is skipping your own vacation so others don't have to skip meals." Every major network aired it live. The moment she finished, producers rushed to cut clips for primetime segments. Twitter filled with hashtags. By midnight, "Cancel the Recess" was trending across the country. In households from Dallas to Detroit, viewers nodded along. They might not follow every rule of Congress, but they understood one simple truth. When regular people don't get to walk away from work, Congress shouldn't either. Saturday morning came with headlines that made even Washington insiders sit up. The Washington Post: "Shutdown politics as Congress plans vacation." The New York Times: "Crockett Stan sparks revolt. Even networks that usually defended Johnson struggled to ignore it. Phone lines at congressional offices lit up. Staffers struggled to keep up with the calls. 'Cancel the recess,' people said. 'Stay and work.' Emails poured in. Veterans, nurses, teachers, all asking the same question. Why are you leaving when we can't?" By Sunday, cracks were visible inside the Speaker's own party. Some moderates gave short interviews saying maybe the recess wasn't the best idea. Others stayed quiet but refused to defend it. The pressure grew by the hour. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, was not resting. She appeared on Morning Joe Monday with fresh notes in hand. "Good morning," the host said. "Congresswoman, the country's still talking about your press conference." "What's next?" Crockett smiled, calm and steady. "Next," she said, "is action. I'm introducing the No Vacation During Shutdown Act. It's very simple. If the government shuts down, Congress cannot recess." No vacations. No fundraisers. You stay until you fix what you broke. The studio went quiet for a moment. The host blinked. Do you think it will pass? I don't know, she said. But every member will have to vote on it. And the American people will see who stands with them and who doesn't. That line hit like a hammer. She had turned a moral argument into a test. Either lawmakers supported the bill, or they exposed their priorities. It was political genius, wrapped in plain language. By Tuesday, the Speaker's office was in full defense mode. Donors were calling. Editorials questioned his leadership. Conservative talk shows debated whether it was wise to recess while Americans suffered. Still, Johnson tried to stay firm. His aides hinted at maybe shortening the break, maybe reconvening early, but nothing certain. Crockett saw the opening and went straight for it. She released a written statement that morning. Speaker Johnson's half measures aren't enough. Federal workers can't pay bills with maybe. Either Congress stays in session, or it doesn't. There is no middle ground when people are hurting. Then she ended it with a sentence that echoed through every newsroom. I will be at my desk in Congress every day of this recess. I invite the Speaker to join me. It was a trap he couldn't escape. If he ignored her, she'd spend 2 weeks showing empty chairs. If he came back, she'd win her demand. Either way, she'd already won the narrative. Wednesday morning, a group of 12 Republican representatives broke ranks. They were from swing districts where voters were furious. Together, they issued a public letter. While we may differ with Representative Crockett on many issues, she's right about this. Our constituents are hurting, and we should be working, not vacationing. That statement changed everything. Reporters called it a revolt. Cable news ran split screens of the Speaker's office on one side and Crockett's calm face on the other. By evening, Johnson had no choice. He stepped up to a podium, his notes trembling slightly. After consulting with members, he said, "We have decided to shorten the recess. The House will reconvene on Monday, October 7th, to continue negotiations." It was not the full reversal Crockett wanted, but everyone knew why it happened. It wasn't his choice. It was pressure. It was people power. When MSNBC went live that night, Jasmine Crockett appeared again, wearing the same determined expression she'd worn on day one. "I'll give the Speaker credit for finally recognizing reality," she said. "But let's be clear. This shouldn't have required a national outcry. It should have been common sense." Her tone softened, almost weary. "Americans go to work every day, even when it's hard. They don't get to walk away, so why should Congress?" That clip spread even faster than the first. By Thursday, late-night comedians were joking about Congress's canceled vacation. But behind the humor was a shift. People began to ask bigger questions. Why did it take a viral moment to make lawmakers do their jobs? Editorials praised her. Talk radio hosts debated her. And on social media, something rare happened. People from both sides of the aisle agreed on one thing. Leaders should work during a crisis. For Crockett, the whirlwind didn't stop. She spent the next few days visiting local food banks and federal offices, speaking directly to workers who were about to miss paychecks. Cameras followed her everywhere, but she didn't sound rehearsed. She just listened. She took notes. One woman at a food pantry in Dallas said softly, "I never thought a congresswoman would come here." Crockett smiled back. "You sent me here. I work for you." That clip aired nationwide. Viewers cried. Comment sections filled with words like honesty and hope. Meanwhile, in the Speaker's wing, aides whispered that Johnson hadn't slept much. Reporters camped outside his door. The story wouldn't die. The pressure was relentless. And each time he tried to move past it, another clip of Crockett surfaced online, reminding everyone who had forced his hand. By Friday, just 1 week after her MSNBC interview, the narrative had flipped completely. What began as outrage had become momentum. Congressional staffers said privately that members were terrified of being caught on the wrong side of the Crockett rule. That night, she went live again on MSNBC. "We're back on Monday," she said. "And when we return, I'll push for a clean continuing resolution. No tricks, no games. Just keep the government running." Her words were calm, but the message was clear. She wasn't finished. Across America, families who had felt forgotten suddenly felt seen. Federal employees shared her clips. Veterans reposted her speeches. Churches discussed her courage during Sunday service. And inside Washington, for the first time in a long time, leaders on both sides realized that one voice, spoken plainly and truthfully, could move an entire system. Jasmine Crockett had turned a shutdown story into a moral reckoning. And though the recess had been shortened, she wasn't celebrating yet. She was preparing for the next fight, because in politics, victories come and go. But moments like this, moments that wake up a nation, don't fade easily. And as Monday approached, the Capitol braced itself again, knowing that when Congress returned, the real showdown was about to begin. Washington was holding its breath. Monday morning arrived gray and heavy, with rain clouds hanging over the Capitol dome. Reporters lined the steps before sunrise, cameras already set up, microphones covered in plastic. Everyone knew something was about to happen. The showdown that had been building all week was finally here. Inside, the halls of Congress buzzed with unusual energy. Staffers hurried with folders, elevators pinged nonstop, and aides whispered updates into phones. Some smiled nervously. Others avoided eye contact altogether. The government was still partially shut down, and the world was watching how Congress would respond. When Representative Jasmine Crockett walked through the main doors, heads turned. She wasn't wearing anything flashy, just a simple navy suit and a determined expression. But there was something about her presence that filled the space. The same reporters who had followed her every word for days now moved closer. The cameras rolled again. She paused only briefly before speaking to the press. "We're here to work," she said calmly. "The American people have waited long enough." Then she walked straight into the chamber, her heels clicking on the marble floors like a steady drumbeat of purpose. By mid-morning, members of Congress took their seats. The air felt charged. Even those who disagreed with her politically could feel it. The shift, the sense that the public was watching closely this time. Speaker Mike Johnson entered a few minutes later, looking more tired than usual. His eyes scanned the room. He avoided looking directly at her, but he knew she was there. The first order of business, debate on a temporary funding resolution, the very thing Crockett had demanded. When the floor opened for discussion, she was one of the first to rise. Her voice was steady, every sentence crisp and clear. "Mr. Speaker," she began, "Americans have endured enough uncertainty. They have done their jobs. Now it's time for us to do ours." There was no anger in her tone now. It was pure focus, a mixture of empathy and authority that silenced even the noisiest corner of the chamber. Federal workers shouldn't have to wonder if their next paycheck will arrive. Seniors shouldn't have to choose between groceries and medicine. Parents shouldn't have to explain to their children why a government that promised to serve them is on pause. Several lawmakers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others nodded, some even clapped quietly. Crockett went on. "Last week I read letters from my constituents. Real people with real pain. I'm asking this chamber, for once, to listen to them. Forget the party talking points. Forget the politics. Just listen." She lifted a small stack of papers, more letters. "Here's another one," she said softly. "This one's from James, a retired postal worker in my district. He says, 'Congresswoman, I worked 35 years serving this country. I never once walked away from my job. Please make sure they don't walk away from theirs.'" The room was silent. You could hear the clicking of a camera shutter. "James deserves better," she said. "Patricia, Sandra, Marcus, they all do. They deserve leaders who stay at the table until the job is done." Her speech lasted only 8 minutes, but it left a mark that would last far longer. Even those who disagreed with her politically couldn't deny it. This was leadership that felt rare, almost old-fashioned. After her speech, debates continued for hours. There were arguments, amendments, procedural pauses. But slowly, under mounting public pressure and visible fatigue, both sides inched toward compromise. That afternoon, the Speaker's staff delivered a quiet note to reporters. A clean, continuing resolution was being finalized for an immediate vote. No policy writers, no tricks, just a temporary measure to reopen the government. By 7 p.m., the vote was called. Members pressed their buttons, green for yes, red for no. The electronic board lit up in bright colors, flickering like the heartbeat of democracy itself. The final count came in, 293 to 139. The resolution passed. The shutdown would end. A wave of applause rolled through the chamber. Even some of the speaker's allies sighed in relief. Jasmine Crockett stayed seated for a moment, staring at the board. Then she smiled faintly and exhaled. Reporters rushed out to file stories. The country was already celebrating online. "Government reopens after Crockett pressure," one headline read. Another said, "Texas Democrat forces Congress back to work." Outside, the rain had stopped. The Capitol dome gleamed under the nightlights. As Crockett stepped out to address the press, she didn't sound triumphant. She sounded reflective. "This isn't about me," she said. "This is about the people who sent us here. The folks who can't afford lobbyists, who can't skip bills, who can't take 2-week recesses. They're the reason this building exists. And they're the reason I'm going to keep showing up, every single day." A reporter asked if she considered this a victory. She paused, then smiled slightly. "A victory for the people, yes. But for Congress, it's a wake-up call." Her words traveled across the nation. Editorials praised her courage. Local news stations interviewed her constituents. One of them, Sandra from Oak Cliff, told a reporter through tears, "I never thought my little letter would matter." But she read it. She really did. That moment captured everything Jasmine Crockett had been fighting for. The link between everyday people and the power meant to serve them. In the following days, donations poured into food banks. Federal offices reopened. Workers returned, weary but relieved. And in living rooms across America, people felt something they hadn't felt in a while. Pride. Pride that someone somewhere had stood up and said enough. But Washington doesn't stay still for long. By the end of that week, pundits were already speculating about what was next for her. Was she a rising national figure? Would she run for leadership? Or was she simply the voice of conscience that appears when a system forgets its purpose? Crockett ignored the chatter. She went back to work. One evening, as she left her office late, a janitor in the hallway stopped her. "Congresswoman," he said, "thank you for not leaving us behind." She smiled softly. "I didn't do it alone," she said. "Millions of people stood with me," he nodded. "Maybe, but you spoke first." That night, Jasmine Crockett sat alone in her office, lights dimmed, the city glowing outside her window. She looked at the folders on her desk, more letters, more messages from people she'd never met, but somehow carried with her everywhere she went. She picked one up, unfolded it, and read quietly. It was a short note, written in shaky handwriting. It said, "Thank you for remembering us." "Please don't stop," she smiled. "I won't," she whispered. The next morning, she was back in committee hearings, back on the House floor, back doing the job she had demanded everyone else do. And though the headlines would soon fade and new stories would take their place, something had changed, not just in Congress, but in the hearts of ordinary Americans who had watched it all unfold. They had seen what real leadership looked like, not loud speeches or empty promises, but simple accountability. Showing up, standing firm, refusing to walk away. In Dallas, at a small community center, someone painted a mural. It showed a woman standing in front of the Capitol, holding a folder close to her heart. Above her, the words, "Stay and fix it." People took pictures with it. Some smiled. Some cried. But every person who saw it understood what it meant. And somewhere in Washington, Jasmine Crockett saw that picture too. She reposted it with 3 simple words. "We're not done." Because for her, this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a new kind of politics, one that spoke human, not jargon. One that showed up, not signed off, and for millions of Americans watching from their living rooms, one thing became clear. Leadership doesn't come from power. It comes from purpose. That truth, simple and undeniable, had just echoed through the halls of Congress. And for once, it didn't fade. It stayed. If this story moved you, don't scroll away just yet. Hit that like button. It really helps this channel reach more people who still believe in accountability and courage. Subscribe for more stories like this. Real voices, real justice, and real hope. And tell us in the comments, what do you think true leadership means today? Your words, your support, and your presence here, that's what keeps this voice alive.